November 29th, 1944. The waters south of Japan lie black and cold, the horizon invisible. Beneath the moonless sky, a monster moves. 70,000 tons of steel gliding silently through the Pacific. The Shinano. At 872 feet, she's the largest aircraft carrier the world has ever seen, a floating fortress that Japan believes cannot die. Beneath her, hidden in the deep, the USS Archerfish stalks her prey. Neither crew knows it yet, but within the next few hours, this encounter will carve itself into naval history. This is how the world's largest carrier was sunk, before she even fired a shot, and how silence, patience, and precision humbled pride built from steel. After Midway, Japan's navy was crippled. 4 carriers gone in a single day. To reclaim lost honor, the Imperial Navy dreamed of a new symbol, the Shinano. Born from the unfinished hull of a Yamato-class battleship, she was rebuilt in secret as a colossal support carrier, a ship meant to carry planes, spare parts, and fuel for others. Her armor was thicker than anything afloat, her bulkheads designed to shrug off torpedoes. Engineers boasted she could take 12 hits and still fight. To Japan, she wasn't just a ship. She was redemption, proof that the Empire could still outbuild and outlast. But arrogance had been welded into every beam. By late 1944, Japan's empire was collapsing. American bombers rained on the home islands. Oil was running dry, and every fleet movement came at a cost. Yet, Shinano was treated as untouchable, a vessel that could not fail. In the shipyards of Yokosuka, work went on day and night under blackout. The paint was still wet when her launch date was set. Her crew knew the truth. She wasn't ready. Pipes unsealed, bulkheads incomplete, watertight doors untested. But Tokyo's order was final. She must sail before bombers found her. So, on the evening of November 28th, the Shinano slipped out of Yokosuka under cover of darkness. Destination Kure Naval Base, where she'd be finished and armed. She carried only a skeleton crew, a third trained sailors, the rest yard workers and mechanics still bolting equipment as she moved. Her escorts, 3 destroyers, Isokaze, Hamikaze, and Yukikaze, formed a loose screen around her, unaware that American submarines prowled these same waters. On paper, Shinano could survive multiple torpedoes. In reality, she could barely handle a sharp turn. The ocean that once belonged to Japan was now American hunting ground. That same night, Archerfish cruised south of Tokyo Bay. Commander Joseph Enright stood in the control room, calm but restless. He'd once let a target escape through caution, a mistake that haunted his record. Tonight, he wanted redemption. At 8 p.m., radar detected a faint blip. Large, fast, moving erratically. Not a convoy, not a freighter. Enright brought the sub to periscope depth. Through the haze, he saw a black silhouette unlike anything he'd ever seen. Massive, moving at 20 knots, flanked by destroyers. He radioed headquarters. No response. He made his choice. Shadow her, stay quiet. Wait. For 6 hours, the submarine crept beneath the surface, mimicking her turns, matching her speed. Every few minutes, Enright lifted the periscope for a glimpse, just enough to confirm she was still there. The crew spoke in whispers. Sweat rolled down faces in the stifling control room. The only sound was the ticking of Enright's stopwatch and the steady hum of machinery. Then, at 3 a.m., Shinano turned broadside, exposing her full flank. Enright didn't hesitate. Standby tubes 1 through 6. The air was electric. Fire. 6 torpedoes launched into the abyss. The submarine shuddered as the weapons left the tubes. Enright began counting. 45 seconds. Nothing. Then, thunder. 4 detonations tore through the ocean, so deep and heavy they shook the hull. The crew cheered, then went dead silent as Enright ordered the sub down to 400 feet. They waited for the counterattack that never came. No depth charges, no pursuit. Only the faint, distant sound of explosions echoing through the dark. What they didn't know yet was that those blasts had just crippled the largest warship ever to sail. Aboard Shinano, chaos erupted. 4 torpedoes struck below her armor belt, flooding boiler rooms and storage compartments. The ship groaned, lights flickered, and power died across half the decks. Captain Toshio Abe, a veteran officer but new to Shinano, believed his ship could endure it. He ordered full speed ahead, hoping to reach shallow water. But the unfinished bulkheads gave way. The faster she went, the faster she drowned. Water rushed through open seams, pouring from one compartment to another. Within half an hour, Shinano listed 5 degrees to starboard. Pumps sputtered and died. Sailors tried everything: wooden plugs, blankets, even mattresses, to seal the leaks. The destroyers circled nervously, unable to approach in the dark. By dawn, the list had doubled. The flight deck slanted visibly toward the sea. Below, men waded waist-deep in freezing water, still trying to patch holes with hand tools. By 7 a.m., the engines faltered, slowing the carrier to 10 knots, then 8. The pumps failed completely. The order came to start towing her. Tow cables snapped like twine under the strain. At 9 a.m., the ship rolled to 20 degrees. Panic spread. Sailors began jumping into the sea on their own, while others were trapped below as doors jammed from pressure. Captain Abe refused to leave the bridge. He ordered the Imperial flag raised higher. He still believed his ship could be saved. But by 10 a.m., Shinano was gone beyond recovery. The massive ship began her final roll. Abe gave the order, "Abandon ship," but it was too late. At 10:57 a.m., the giant turned over completely, her stern rising before vanishing into the deep. In less than a minute, the largest carrier ever built was gone. Out of 2,400 aboard, just over 1,000 were rescued. Captain Abe went down with his command. Tokyo was paralyzed by the news. The Imperial Navy buried the truth, forbidding survivors to speak, admitting that Japan's pride, the ship meant to restore national spirit, had sunk on her maiden voyage was unthinkable. The world wouldn't even know she existed until after Japan's surrender. When Archerfish reported sinking a massive carrier, American analysts doubted it. Impossible, they said. Only years later, after the war, did captured Japanese records confirm it. Enright's torpedoes had destroyed Shinano. He received the Navy Cross. His crew, the Presidential Unit Citation. But more than a record kill, it marked the death of an idea. That sheer size was strength. Shinano proved that speed, training, and precision mattered more than armor. That in modern warfare, the quiet hunter beats the giant every time. Enright would later say, "She was the biggest ship ever sunk by a submarine. We never even knew her name until after the war." No photos of Shinano underway survive. No combat record, no victories, just fragments of blueprints, and the memories of men who built her, and the few who escaped her. She was meant to symbolize power. Instead, she became a warning that arrogance sinks faster than steel. No grand battle, no heroic speeches, just one silent encounter in the dark. A single submarine, 6 torpedoes, and the end of an empire's illusion. The ocean closed over Shinano, and over the age of the supership itself. What followed after the Shinano sank was not a roar of mourning, but a void, a silence so complete it felt engineered. The Imperial Navy sealed the reports, silenced the press, and erased the ship's name from all records. Shipyard workers who had built her were told she had been reassigned under a new designation. Survivors were scattered to different units, forbidden to speak even among themselves. The ocean had taken the carrier, but the Empire buried the story. To the Japanese people, the Shinano never existed. The truth didn't surface until years later, when occupation forces began combing through captured archives. Allied intelligence officers stumbled on fragments, shipyard blueprints, half-finished maintenance logs, production schedules referencing CV-4001. When the pieces came together, disbelief turned to awe. The Americans realized their submarines had unknowingly destroyed a ship larger than anything they themselves had ever built. And that realization stung not Japan, but the old world of naval doctrine. the idea that armor and size could still guarantee survival. The Shinano was supposed to embody the might of the Yamato era, unstoppable, indestructible, almost divine in engineering. Her armor was thicker than any carriers before or since, but all of that genius drowned because her builders believed a legend instead of physics. They trusted armor when they should have trusted mathematics, manpower, and time. The ship that was meant to prove Japan's superiority instead exposed its fatal weakness: pride. For Commander Joseph Enright, news of the Shinano's true identity reached him only after the war. He was at home, quietly writing his patrol report into a memoir draft, when a Navy officer delivered a letter confirming that the massive vessel he had sunk was indeed the Shinano, a converted Yamato-class battleship, the biggest ship ever built, the biggest ship ever sunk by a submarine. Enright sat for a long time without speaking. Then he poured himself a cup of coffee and wrote one line in his notebook. Sometimes the ocean hides gods so they can die unseen. He never glorified the kill. In later interviews, he admitted it didn't feel like triumph. She was a monster, yes, but she was full of kids, boys not ready for sea. Half of them were shipyard workers who never held a weapon. They died in the dark because someone believed steel could replace strategy. He paused. That's not victory. That's a warning. Back in Japan, the few survivors of Shinano carried quiet guilt. They had been rescued by destroyers that fished them from oil-slicked seas, half dead and trembling. Many never spoke of that morning. A few later described the eerie calm before she rolled over, the sound of creaking bulkheads, the rush of air escaping compartments, and the single desperate order from Captain Abe echoing through the corridors. Keep her alive. One petty officer said years later, the ship felt like she was breathing, and then suddenly she stopped. For decades, divers and historians searched for Shinano's resting place. Her coordinates were classified, her wreck unconfirmed. In 2001, a Japanese oceanographic team finally identified a sonar image, a shape nearly 900 feet long, lying broken in 2,000 feet of water south of Honshu. The hull was upside down, its stern twisted and buried in silt. Her massive flight deck was intact, eerily preserved, like a tombstone. Photographs showed the shattered bulkhead where Archerfish's torpedoes had struck. 4 perfect scars in a ship that was supposed to be unsinkable. When images of the wreck were shown in Tokyo, they drew quiet crowds. There was no celebration, no national grief, just fascination mixed with disbelief that something so vast could vanish for half a century beneath the waves. Engineers whispered that the ship's design had been beautiful, even poetic, but cursed by haste and pride. To the old generation of naval architects, Shinano's wreck became a lesson passed down through universities. No ship is invincible if her builders believe she is. Today, her story is retold not as a tragedy of loss, but as a study in evolution. The Shinano marked the end of the age of superships, those colossal fortresses that once defined naval might. After her, the future belonged to the unseen. Submarines, aircraft, missiles, the quiet hunters. In that sense, the Shinano's death was not just an end, but a turning point, the exact moment the sea declared that stealth beat strength. When veterans of the USS Archerfish gathered for reunions decades later, the conversation always drifted back to that night. Someone would mention the faint blip on the radar, the slow stalking through the dark, the explosion that felt like the ocean itself had cracked open. They spoke with pride but also reverence, because they knew what they had destroyed wasn't just a ship, it was an idea. Commander Enright lived long enough to see the sonar photographs of Shinano's wreck. When asked what he thought, he just said, "We never saw her clearly that night, only her shadow. I guess now, the ocean's showing us what we took away." There's something haunting about that, the notion that history's biggest battles aren't fought with noise, but with waiting, that the most decisive moment of the Pacific War didn't happen in daylight or under roaring guns, but in the dark silence between a predator and its prey. The Shinano was built to restore faith in steel. The archerfish proved that silence, invisible, uncelebrated, patient silence, is stronger than armor. In the end, the ocean swallowed not just a ship, but an entire generation's belief that human pride could outbuild the sea. And as her wreck sleeps quietly beneath 2,000 feet of black water, one truth remains. The sound that ended her wasn't an explosion. It was the echo of everything she was built to ignore. And somewhere beneath that weight of water and time, the Shinano still hums with the memory of what she was supposed to be. The currents slip through her shattered hangar bays, brushing over collapsed catwalks and twisted steel. Fish weave between beams that once held aircraft fuel lines. Coral clings to her armored deck. In the dim light of the deep, her colossal hull looks less like a weapon and more like a cathedral. Silent, reverent, almost apologetic. The sea doesn't care about pride or purpose. It takes everything back, slowly and without noise. When deep-sea cameras first captured the wreck, the technicians noticed how oddly serene she seemed. No jagged chaos, no violent distortion, just a slow, dignified decay. Her imperial insignia still faintly visible under layers of rust. It was as if even the ocean chose to let her die quietly, honoring the same silence that ended her. For the divers who descended near her hull, the size was incomprehensible. 870 feet of sunken monument, her flight deck stretching into the dark like an endless road. Some said standing next to her felt like standing at the edge of history itself. Above, modern carriers now cross the same waters she sank in. They move faster, their engines whispering compared to the monsters of 1944. Their hulls are designed for stealth, their shapes sculpted by radar signatures and sound reduction. Every time one of those ships cuts through the Pacific night, it unknowingly echoes the lesson Shinano paid for in blood and salt water. Every sonar officer who stares at a blank screen, hearing nothing but ocean static, owes a silent debt to the moment a submarine's patience changed naval warfare forever. For Japan, Shinano became a ghost story told only in military academies, a parable about overconfidence. For America, she became a line in a record book, a statistic that still stands unmatched. But for sailors, the ones who've listened to the hum of engines in the dark, her story means something else entirely. It's the reminder that the ocean always wins, that arrogance sinks faster than lead, that silence can be deadlier than sound. Commander Enright died in 2000, quietly, at 89. At his funeral, one of his crewmen spoke over the folded flag on the casket. "We never saw the ship, only her shadow," he said. "But sometimes that's all you need to know where to aim." His words hung in the air like a prayer. The brass band didn't play victory songs, just the soft rise of "Eternal Father strong to save," the hymn of those who go to sea and never come back. Today, at the Naval History Museum in Washington, there's a glass case that holds a piece of twisted metal, roughly the size of a hand. It's dark, salt-eaten, nearly unrecognizable. The placard below it reads, "Fragment from IJN Shinano, recovered 2001. Next to it sits a small model of the USS Archerfish, two extremes inches apart, a symbol of everything war destroys and everything silence can achieve. Visitors rarely linger. Most walk past, not realizing they're standing before the wreckage of an empire's dream. But every now and then a sailor stops, leans closer, and stays longer than most. They know what it means to wait in the dark. They know that beneath every order, every machine, every blast of noise, there's a heartbeat of silence that decides everything. The Shinano's final transmission never made it to Tokyo. Somewhere between the flooding compartments and dying power grids, her last signal broke into static. A single phrase half transmitted before the lines went dead. List increasing, attempting to, and then nothing. Just the ocean closing over her. That incomplete message sits in the archives, preserved like an unfinished sentence. Because in truth, her story never really ended. It just sank deeper. If you could drift down there now, past the thermocline and the blackness, past the layers where sunlight has never reached, you'd find her resting on her side, still massive, still proud in her ruin. The sea presses against her armor with quiet patience, the same patience that once hunted her. The nameplate is gone, the flag disintegrated, but the silence remains. It always does. That's what history forgets, that the sound of victory isn't always an explosion. Sometimes it's the absence of one. Sometimes it's a single submarine waiting in the dark, holding its breath while the ocean holds its secrets. The Shinano, once the mightiest symbol of naval power, vanished without witnesses, without glory. And maybe that's fitting, because she wasn't just a ship that sank. She was an empire realizing too late that the sea listens to no one. And so, the Pacific keeps her. A tomb, a warning, a mirror for every navy that dares to think it can't fall. The waves above roll on like nothing happened, erasing her wake as if to say, remember your place. And beneath them, the Shinano sleeps forever in silence, right where pride met patience, and patience won. And yet, every few decades the sea reminds us she's still there. Sonar scans ping against her hull like echoes of memory. Research ships drift above, tracing her coordinates into digital maps. She's no longer a weapon, no longer a secret. She's a monument now, carved not by hands but by time. The divers who've glimpsed her describe an eerie stillness, a feeling that she's listening, not gone. Her decks, once meant for squadrons of Zero fighters, now carry nothing but sand, coral, and quiet. The ocean has made her part of itself. Nature, reclaiming man's defiance one rivet at a time. The deeper currents sweep through her hangars like wind through empty cathedrals. When light from the remotely operated vehicles hits her bow, it gleams faintly, a ghost of the imperial chrysanthemum still recognizable, though half consumed by rust. To those who descend that deep, it's not the size that terrifies them. It's the silence. They say you can feel it pressing against your helmet, as if the ocean itself is whispering the lesson that men died to learn. When the data was published, one Japanese historian wrote, "The Shinano was built to make Japan invincible. She instead taught us humility." It wasn't meant as poetry, but it read like scripture, because the Shinano story isn't really about ships or war. It's about every time in history humanity has tried to outbuild its own limits, and been reminded that nature, patience, and silence don't care about blueprints. In naval academies, officers still study her loss, not for tactics, but for psychology. The official report lists technical reasons: poor watertight integrity, untested pumps, inexperienced crew. But the unofficial conclusion is simpler. Pride kills. Commanders use her name as a warning during drills. Don't be the Shinano. It's shorthand for overconfidence, for blind obedience, for the arrogance of unsinkable. Meanwhile, at submarine schools, cadets still learn about the archerfish's patience. The 6-hour shadowing maneuver is shown frame by frame. How Enright stayed on target despite exhaustion. How his crew held their nerves in the humid dark. How they fired at exactly the right moment without knowing the size of what they'd struck. The lesson isn't about luck or skill. It's about trust, in silence, in waiting, in the invisible rhythm of war, where noise means death and calm means victory. Decades later, in 1973, Enright was interviewed for a television documentary. The host asked him what he thought when he learned it was the largest carrier ever built. He smiled slightly and said, "Size doesn't matter when you're already sinking." The audience laughed, but Enright didn't. He added, "You can build a mountain out there, but if you forget to listen, the ocean will remind you." The world that followed that war learned his lesson. Every modern naval weapon, from sonar-guided torpedoes to stealth destroyers, owes its lineage to the same principle that destroyed Shinano. Hear more, speak less. The age of thunder gave way to the age of whispers. Battleships faded, Aircraft carriers shrank. Submarines ruled. The ocean became a chessboard of ghosts, and the loudest thing left in it was memory. Back in Japan, the few remaining shipbuilders from Yokosuka lived long enough to see the rediscovery of her wreck. They gathered quietly in 2002 at a memorial overlooking Sagami Bay. Most were in their 80s, stooped and gray, wearing old worker caps instead of medals. One of them, a former welder, left a paper note on the railing. It read, "Forgive us for sending you too soon." The wind tore it away before anyone could photograph it. On certain calm nights, fishermen still claimed to hear strange sounds in the water, metallic groans, deep and rhythmic, like something breathing below. Science says it's tectonic movement or underwater currents colliding with the wreck's cavities. But the locals call it Shinano's heart. They say the ocean remembers. Maybe they're right. When you think about it, the Shinano's death wasn't just an accident or a tragedy. It was prophecy. It marked the moment humanity learned that greatness doesn't roar. It waits. That every empire that believes itself unsinkable is already cracking somewhere below the surface. And so, the Shinano remains where she fell, deeper than sunlight, colder than memory, her engines long dead, her armor softened by decades of tides. She no longer belongs to any flag or nation. She belongs to the sea. Her silence stretches on, infinite, echoing through sonar waves and naval textbooks alike. Because in the end, the ocean always wins. And every ship that sails across those waters, every steel hull trembling against the weight of the deep, carries a whisper of her warning. Be humble or be swallowed.